Welcome in. Come on in and get comfortable. We are just thrilled to have you here with us today.
We really are. It's great to be here.
Whether you're, prepping for a big meeting or maybe tackling a mountain of laundry or just feeding that beautifully insatiable curiosity of yours, you have landed in exactly the right place.
Spot on.
Today we're taking a deep dive into a really thought-provoking stack of research notes and historical analysis. It's titled The Viral Nature of Hate in History and Media. I want to pitch a premise to you right out of the gate, something for you to hold in your mind as we go through this.
Go for it.
What if hate isn't just a spontaneous, unpredictable human emotion? What if it operates exactly, and I mean mechanically predictably, like a biological virus?
Right.
The kind of pathogen that spreads through contact, mutates to survive, specifically exploits our weakened immune systems, and can literally go pandemic.
It's a profound premise. And I know you, listening right now, as someone who really loves to understand the why behind complex systems, you're going to find this framework fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, we should acknowledge up front that this is undeniably a dark and heavy subject to wade into. We're looking at the worst of human history. But the overarching thesis of our sources today is actually incredibly empowering.
It really is.
The idea is that if we can understand the exact repeatable mechanics of how hate is manufactured and transmitted across a population, we actually gain the power to dismantle it. We shift from being passive victims of a contagion to, well, active public health workers for our society.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the parallels in the research between a physical biological virus and societal hate are honestly striking once you see them.
They're impossible to unsee.
Right.
Oh?
So think about how a physical virus works. It spreads through contact. In a societal context, that means repeated exposure to hateful rhetoric normalizes it. If you hear it enough, the shock value wears off, your defenses drop, and the infection takes hold. Then the virus mutates. It shifts its targets, changes its political ideologies, and adapts across different cultures and eras just to stay alive. And maybe most importantly, it exploits a weakened immune system.
That's the crucial part.
A biological virus waits for you to be physically exhausted. The virus of hate waits for a society to experience severe economic despair, social isolation, or political instability. It preys on populations when they are at their absolute most vulnerable.
What's fascinating here is that the sources don't just hand us this metaphor and expect us to accept it blindly. They actively invite us to challenge it. There's a very strong, philosophically grounded counter-argument presented in the research.
I'm glad we're touching on this.
Critics of this virus metaphor argue that it can actually be quite dangerous. By calling hate a contagion or an infection, we subtly remove moral agency.
Yeah, I actually struggle with that quite a bit. I mean, if we call it a virus, aren't we essentially giving a free pass to people who choose to do horrible things? It sounds like an excuse, like, oh, I caught the hate flu on the subway, it's not my fault.
Exactly. And that is the exact tension the critics point out. It risks making hate sound like an involuntary biological reaction rather than a deliberate, conscious choice to harm others.
Right.
Furthermore, there's a historical risk of medicalizing political dissent. If we buy into this completely, governments could potentially label any legitimate political opposition as simply being infected with a societal virus that needs to be legally cured or eradicated.
Wow. Yeah, that is a terrifying loophole.
So we have to balance the mechanics of the metaphor with the reality of human responsibility.
That is such a vital tension for you listening right now to keep in mind today. As we look at the historical evidence, ask yourself, is the hate we are seeing an involuntary infection a deliberate choice, or is it a weapon being wielded?
Because historically, the sources show us a chillingly consistent blueprint for how this weapon is built.
It never just explodes out of nowhere. It is engineered in a four-step pattern. First, identify a scapegoat. Blame another for very real societal grievances. Second, dehumanize them using specific, degrading language and imagery. Third, institutionalize that hate into laws, media, or policy. And finally, step 4, mobilize the actual violence.
We can trace this exact four-step blueprint all the way back to the ancient world. Look at ancient Rome and the early persecution of Christians in the 1st to 3rd centuries.
Talk about a weakened immune system.
Oh, absolutely. Rome was dealing with massive societal weakened immune systems. You had devastating fires, severe economic decline, and a perceived moral decay. Emperor Nero didn't just stumble into violence randomly. He used Christians as the ultimate scapegoat.
Right.
It's the earliest perfectly documented blueprint of this pattern. Find a vulnerable minority, blame them for the societal pain everyone is feeling, and unleash the crowd to relieve the pressure.
And once that blueprint exists, the virus just mutates over time to fit whatever the current society looks like.
Precisely. And the historical nuance of how it mutates is something I find incredibly compelling, especially when we look at the Spanish Inquisition starting in 1478.
The state institutionalized religious hatred.
Yes, forcing Jews and Muslims to convert, flee, or face torture. But the mutation here was that the virus evolved to target identity itself, not just behavior. The Inquisitors suspected even the converted Jews known as conversos of secretly practicing Judaism in their minds or behind closed doors.
So you couldn't even prove your innocence.
Exactly. It shows how hate, once it is structurally embedded into a society's institutions, becomes completely self-sustaining. It no longer needs visible evidence or actual behavior to react to. The mere existence of the identity becomes the infection they want to fight.
Which brings us to a massive, prolonged outbreak covered in our notes. The transatlantic slave trade.
A dark, dark chapter.
The research frames this not as an acute, sudden outbreak of violence, but as a chronic systemic disease that lasted for centuries. The really critical insight here is that the racial hatred associated with the slave trade wasn't just some accidental byproduct of two groups meeting.
Far from it.
Pseudoscientific racism was deliberately, painstakingly invented to give hatred an intellectual costume. Why? Because they needed to justify the incredibly lucrative economics of slavery. As the notes point out, hate very often just follows the money. It puts on a lab coat or a religious robe to make a horrific profit margin socially acceptable.
That economic driver is essential to understand. If we move into the 20th century, the Holocaust is arguably the most documented case of hate being engineered as a political and economic weapon.
Because Hitler didn't invent German anti-Semitism?
No, he weaponized a virus that had existed in Europe for centuries.
Yeah.
But it required that weakened immune system we talked about, the deep national humiliation and total economic collapse of the Weimar Republic following World War I.
Right.
Then you have propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels acting as the chief virus spreader. It was a gradual, methodical escalation. They institutionalized the hate with the Nuremberg Laws in 1935, legally stripping Jews of citizenship long before the mass violence of the death camps began.
It's that simmer effect.
Yes. The historical lesson the data gives us is clear. Hate rarely explodes spontaneously. It simmers for a long time and then it boils.
That simmer then boil concept is perfectly and tragically illustrated by what happened in Rwanda in 1994. It's one of the most devastating case studies in the entire deep dive. In just 100 days, 800,000 Tutsi people were murdered by their Hutu neighbors.
Unimaginable scale.
But what I found so important in the research was how it happened. What was the vehicle of transmission? It was the radio. It wasn't just vague propaganda. Radio Mill Collins was literally broadcasting lists of names, giving out addresses, and directing killers in real time. They continuously referred to the Tutsis as Inyenzi, which translates to cockroaches.
Which is exactly step 2 of the blueprint. Dehumanization.
Right.
If you convince a population that their neighbors are insects, extermination becomes a pest control problem, not a moral failing.
Exactly. The radio acted as the circulatory system, pumping this toxic pathogen directly into people's living rooms and cars. It's the absolute pre-internet proof that mass media is the ultimate vector for this virus.
And we see that same dormant virus being manipulated by external forces and political opportunists elsewhere, too. Look at the partition of India in 1947.
The colonial influence?
Yes. British colonial policy actively utilized a divide-and-rule strategy. They deliberately inflamed Hindu-Muslim tensions for decades as a tool of administrative control. They cultivated the virus. When the colonial power finally left, that cultivated division erupted, resulting in up to 2 million deaths.
2 million.
Or consider the Balkan Wars in the 1990s. The virus of ethnic hatred had been dormant in the former Yugoslavia for decades, kept under wraps by a strict authoritarian regime. But it was intentionally reactivated by political opportunists using Serbian state television to portray Bosnian Muslims and Croats as existential threats. Within a few short years, neighbors were killing neighbors, culminating in atrocities like Srebrenica in 1995.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We move from the era of analog radio and state-controlled television directly into the smartphone era. The modern mutation of this virus is supercharged by what the research calls the engagement outrage loop.
This changes everything about how fast the virus moves.
It does. Social media platforms realize very early on that outrage drives user engagement, and user engagement drives advertising revenue. It's basically like a junk food diet for the brain. The algorithm realizes that anger is the high fructose corn syrup that keeps us endlessly clicking and scrolling, so it just feeds us a steady diet of outrage.
It doesn't differentiate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't care if a post is a cute puppy or a vicious slur. It just rewards whatever keeps your eyes glued to the screen. Now, I want to pause here for a second and address you directly, the listener.
Good call.
We are about to dive into some modern, highly politically charged case studies. And I want to make it unequivocally clear that neither of us are taking any political sides here. We are strictly impartially reporting the case studies and the data as they are presented in the source material. The goal is strictly to understand the mechanics of information spread.
It's important to look at modern events through this exact same clinical lens. If we look at the data from the 2017 crisis in Myanmar, we see the blueprint play out digitally. For many citizens in Myanmar at that time, Facebook effectively was the entire internet.
The app came preloaded on phones, right?
Yes, and Buddhist nationalist monks utilized the platform to spread highly targeted, dehumanizing content about the Rohingya Muslim minority. The UN ultimately concluded that Facebook played a determining role in the ensuing ethnic cleansing, which drove over 700,000 Rohingya from their homes.
When the platform knew about it.
The platform's internal monitors were aware of the rhetoric, but they lacked the language resources and the financial incentive to contain the outbreak before it spilled into physical violence.
And we saw a terrifying evolution of this with the 2019 Christchurch mosque shootings in New Zealand. The shooter literally live-streamed his attack on Facebook Live, and that video was downloaded and reshared 1.5 million times in just the first 24 hours. Now, the source material notes that this violence was deeply rooted in the Great Replacement conspiracy theory.
A prime example of digital incubation.
Wait, before we move on, for those who might only know the name, what exactly is the Great Replacement theory claiming? And how did these specific platforms incubate it?
It's a crucial point of context. The Great Replacement is a white nationalist conspiracy theory. It falsely claims that a secretive, often globalist or Jewish elite is deliberately plotting to replace the white populations of Western countries with non-white immigrants.
Okay, so it manufactures a fake existential threat.
Exactly. It's designed to create a sense of existential panic, and the way it incubated is fascinating from a systemic perspective. It didn't start on mainstream platforms. It was cultivated on fringe, unmoderated online forums like 4chan and 8chan for years.
Away from the public eye.
Yes. These forums acted like a petri dish where the virus could mutate without any antibodies, meaning no counter-arguments or moderation, before it finally jumped to the mainstream internet and resulted in real-world mass violence.
We also see the sheer power of algorithmic recommendation discussed in the sources regarding the January 6th Capitol riot in the U.S. According to the leaked Facebook papers brought forward by whistleblower Frances Haugen, the platform's own internal researchers had explicitly flagged that their algorithm had a tendency to funnel normal users into highly radicalized political groups.
The data was right there.
The internal data show the radicalization pipeline was active. Yet those internal warnings were largely ignored by executives in favor of sustaining user engagement.
The statistical link between online rhetoric and real-world viral spikes is undeniable across the board. The sources point out that during the COVID-19 pandemic, when terms like Kung Flu began trending heavily online, anti-Asian hate crimes spiked by 339% worldwide.
339%, that is staggering.
It wasn't an isolated local issue, it was a global symptom of a linguistic virus. Similarly, following the October 7th attacks in the Middle East, global anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hate surged by over 400%.
And the platforms fuel that fire.
The research specifically flags platforms like TikTok for algorithmic models that pushed highly inflammatory, completely one-sided, contextless videos to millions of young users simultaneously, stripping away all historical nuance in favor of pure emotional reaction.
But it's not just the hyper-advanced AI-driven algorithms doing this, right? The notes highlight that this happens with incredibly basic tech, too.
Yes, the low-tech variations are just as dangerous. In rural India between 2017 and 2019, misinformation regarding child kidnappers spread rapidly via WhatsApp.
Just simple text messages.
Just messages forwarded from neighbor to neighbor. Because WhatsApp is an end-to-end encrypted messaging service and the rural communities had very low media literacy, these rumors couldn't be fact-checked by journalists or moderated by the company. It was a digital whisper campaign that resulted in mob lynchings, killing over 30 innocent people.
Unbelievable.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the architecture of modern technology is perfectly, almost elegantly designed for a pathogen. Well, you have anonymity, which completely removes the social consequences of hate speech. If you don't have to put your real face on it, the social immune system can't hold you accountable. You have micro-targeting, allowing extremist groups to find emotional and vulnerable recruits with surgical precision.
Like finding a weakened immune system on demand.
Precisely. You have encrypted networks where hate can organize in the dark. And now we have AI generating propaganda at an industrial scale. I think the most staggering statistic in all our notes is this. According to internal tech research, 64% of the people who joined extremist groups on Facebook did so simply because the platform's algorithm actively recommended the group to them.
64%.
They didn't go looking for it. The virus found them.
So what does this all mean? We've painted a pretty bleak picture here today. If the virus is this adaptable, if human nature is this vulnerable, and the tech is this terrifyingly efficient, is there a cure? Are we just hopelessly waiting around to catch the next variant?
The sources provide a very calm, grounded voice of reason here, which is much needed. The hard truth is no, there is no permanent cure.
Right.
Just like we haven't permanently eradicated human influenza, we will likely never completely eradicate human prejudice. It's part of the flawed human condition. However, just like in public health, we are not powerless. We can treat the outbreaks, drastically reduce transmission rates, and actively build societal immunity.
Let's look at the vaccines. The preventative measures the research suggests. Education is a massive one. The notes highlight Germany's mandatory Holocaust education.
A great example.
By confronting their darkest history directly and structurally in their school systems, they've built a powerful, multi-generational societal immunization against anti-Semitism. It's about remembering the symptoms so you recognize the disease when it returns.
And then there is the psychological vaccine, which is perhaps the most hopeful part of the research, psychologist Gordon Allport's contact theory.
I love this part.
It's brilliant. Allport's research in the mid-20th century demonstrated that genuine, meaningful contact between different groups naturally reduces prejudice. But, and this is key, it requires specific conditions.
You can't just put people in a room together.
No, that doesn't work. They need equal status, shared goals, and mutual cooperation. When communities are genuinely integrated and working together towards something positive, they build natural, lasting immunity to dehumanizing rhetoric.
Think about your own life for a second. Allport's contact theory basically proves that it's infinitely harder to hate a demographic of people if you're playing on the same intramural soccer team, or working on the same high-stakes project at the office, or volunteering at the same community garden.
Exactly. Shared goals build empathy.
It breaks down the caricature of the other. I also love the systemic example of Finland in our notes. They treat media literacy not as an elective, but as a core national survival skill. They teach it from elementary school onward.
That's incredible foresight.
Right. They are literally teaching 7-year-olds how to spot a manipulated image, how emotional propaganda works, and how to independently verify sources. They are inoculating their youth against disinformation before the virus even has a chance to reach them.
But of course, prevention sometimes fails. When an outbreak happens, we need antivirals for containment. Today, this takes the form of platform regulation.
Like the laws in Europe.
Yes. For instance, Germany introduced the NetzDG law. What this actually does mechanically is require large social media platforms to remove clearly illegal hate speech within 24 hours of it being reported. Or they face massive fines, upwards of 50 million euros.
That gets their attention.
It effectively shifts the financial burden of the virus onto the platform. If they don't clean it up, they pay for it. The European Union recently rolled out the Digital Services Act to do something very similar across the entire continent.
What about taking away the megaphones of the people spreading it?
Right, deplatforming superspreaders. The data shows it works. When conspiracy theorist Alex Jones was removed from major social platforms, his reach and influence dropped by an estimated 70%.
Wow.
It is always a controversial antiviral because it bumps right up against free speech debates. But mechanically speaking, removing the most infectious vector stops the spread.
And we also have incredible counter-narrative campaigns acting as antivirals. Organizations like Life After Hate, which was founded by former white supremacists and extremists, they show that the most effective way to pull someone out of radicalization is through outreach from someone who has survived the exact same virus.
Peer intervention is powerful.
They know the symptoms, they know the appeal, and they offer a way out without judgment.
Finally, to build long-term immunity, we have to look at the society as a whole. Economic stability is paramount.
Because it targets the weakened immune system?
Exactly. Nearly every major historical outbreak of hate was preceded by an economic crisis. When people have secure jobs, affordable housing, and a believable vision for their future, they are simply less susceptible to scapegoating. They don't need someone to blame.
Makes perfect sense.
And it requires political leadership that actively models inclusion rather than division. Look at Rwanda's post-genocide reconstruction. Leadership deliberately removed the ethnic categories of Hutu and Tutsi from citizen ID cards. They fundamentally dismantled the structural language that fueled the genocide in the first place, emphasizing a shared national identity instead.
To wrap this all up, the overarching theme of this deep dive is a humbling one. The virus metaphor reveals that every single one of us and every society is potentially susceptible. Nobody is permanently immune to fear, scarcity, or algorithmically amplified outrage.
Nobody.
But history also proves that genuine recoveries are entirely possible. Post-war Germany, post-apartheid South Africa, and modern Rwanda. These societies show us that if we confront the virus honestly and structurally, we can heal and build resilience.
This raises an important question, something for you to consider long after we wrap up today. We know that current social media algorithms act as super spreaders because their entire business model financially rewards outrage.
Right.
But we also know from Gordon Allport that contact theory equals status, shared goals, mutual cooperation is our single best psychological vaccine against prejudice. So what would the internet look like if algorithms were actually programmed to reward mutual cooperation and meaningful cross-cultural contact instead of conflict? What if tech companies built their models around contact theory instead of the engagement outrage loop?
Wow. Imagine an algorithm optimized for empathy and shared human goals instead of just brainstem engagement. I want you to chew on that brilliant idea the next time you open a social media app and start scrolling. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we will catch you next time.